In 1998, a cable technician named Frank Kowalski descended into a maintenance shaft beneath Chicago's Loop District. What he found 40 feet below the modern city wasn't supposed to exist according to the official timeline. Perfectly preserved storefronts, intact cobblestone streets, gas lamps still mounted to brick walls that the city claimed were demolished in 1871 during the Great Chicago Fire. Frank spent the next 6 months laying fiber optic cable through tunnels that connected an entire buried city. He photographed everything, took measurements, documented doorways, window frames, and architecture that matched no known Chicago building style from the 1800s. Then his supervisor told him to stop taking pictures. The project files were sealed, and Frank was reassigned to surface work for the rest of his career. If you're finding this valuable, hit subscribe. I cover suppressed history and architectural mysteries every week. Now let's talk about what Frank actually saw down there. Chicago's official story is simple. The city burned in 1871. They rebuilt on top of the ruins, raising the street level to improve drainage and install modern sewage systems. The old first floors became basements. Case closed. Frank's photographs tell a different story. The structures he documented weren't burnt, no fire damage, no charred wood or melted glass. Just pristine buildings entombed in fill dirt and sealed away from the surface world. The brick patterns matched European construction techniques from the 1700s, not the 1800s. The doorway proportions were wrong for the era, too tall, too wide, built for a different kind of traffic than horse-drawn carriages. And the gas lines. Frank found copper gas pipes running through walls at depths the city claimed were never developed. The pipes were stamped with dates: 1857, 1863, 1869, all predating the fire by years. The city's explanation: those were service tunnels for utilities, nothing more. Frank measured the tunnels 12 feet high, 8 feet wide, with vaulted brick ceilings and decorative archways. These weren't utility corridors, these were streets. The downtown Chicago tunnel system officially consists of 60 miles of freight tunnels built between 1899 and 1959. They were used to transport coal, goods and mail beneath the city streets to avoid surface congestion. But Frank's maps showed something else. The tunnel network he worked in extended for at least 200 miles. Most of it predated the official construction timeline by decades. He found intersections marked with street signs. Washington, State, Madison. The same streets that exist on the surface today, but these were underground, surrounded by buildings with working storefronts sealed behind brick walls. In one section beneath what's now the Willis Tower, Frank discovered a 3-story building completely intact underground. The windows were still glazed. The doors still had handles. A painted sign above the entrance read Kepler and Sons and Fine Instruments, Est 1847. The official record has no listing for Kepler and Sons anywhere in Chicago history. Frank tried researching the company. Nothing. He checked census records, business directories and property deeds. The company didn't exist according to any archive. But the building was there. He photographed the sign, the door, the windows showing shelving inside through the glass. His supervisor confiscated those photographs, told him they were a safety liability because they showed unauthorized access to condemned structures. The gas line discovery was what got Frank pulled from the project permanently. He was routing cable along what his map designated as Tunnel 47B, a service corridor beneath Wacker Drive. The tunnel walls were standard brick until he reached a section where the brickwork changed. Different pattern, different colour, different style entirely. And embedded in this older section was a gas distribution hub, cast iron, ornate, with pressure gauges and valve wheels that looked like something from an industrial museum. Frank photographed the hub. The gauges still showed residual pressure. The valves turned smoothly, despite supposedly being buried and abandoned for 130 years. The manufacturer's plate was still legible. Consolidated Gas Trust, Chicago Works, 1856. The problem? Chicago's first gas company wasn't founded until 1850, and gas lines weren't installed throughout downtown until the 1860s. This hub suggested a fully developed gas infrastructure existed years before the official timeline claimed it was possible. And it was 60 feet underground, beneath layers of fill dirt that the city claimed were added after 1871. Frank did the math. The fill dirt above this section would have taken years to settle and compact to the density he measured. The gas hub couldn't have been installed after the fire. It had to predate it by a lot. He brought this to his project manager, showed him the photographs, the measurements, the manufacturer's plate. The response was immediate. Frank was removed from underground work. His photographs were confiscated as company property. His contract was restructured to surface installations only. When he pushed back, his supervisor told him something that stayed with him for the rest of his life. "Frank, there are things under this city that don't match the paperwork. Your job is to install cable, not ask questions about what's already down there." Frank kept copies of some photographs, not all of them, just enough to prove he wasn't imagining what he'd seen. The storefronts, the intact windows, the gas hub, the 3-story building with the painted sign. He tried showing them to historians. Most dismissed them as misidentified utility structures or freight tunnel access points. One historian told him the photographs were interesting but irrelevant because they contradicted established historical records. Another historian, off the record, told him that Chicago's underground had been problematic for researchers for decades. Too many inconsistencies, too many structures that don't fit the timeline, too many sealed sections that the city refuses to explain. The researcher mentioned the Commonwealth Edison tunnels, how workers in the 1920s reported finding old buildings while expanding the electrical grid underground. How those reports were dismissed as worker confusion or alcohol-related hallucinations. Frank wasn't the first to see what was down there. He was just one of the few who documented it before being told to stop. There's a pattern in Chicago's underground development that doesn't make sense with the official narrative. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 supposedly destroyed 17,000 buildings and left 100,000 people homeless. The city rebuilt rapidly, raising street levels by 10 to 15 feet across downtown to install modern sewage and drainage systems. The problem is the math. Raising an entire city's street level by 15 feet in the middle of ongoing reconstruction would require moving millions of tons of fill dirt. The logistics alone would take years. The official timeline says it happened in months while simultaneously rebuilding every destroyed structure. Where did the fill dirt come from? How did they move it? Who coordinated the effort? The historical record is vague. Various sources. Lake fill. Debris from demolished structures. Frank's underground photographs show why the record might be deliberately vague. The structures he documented weren't demolished, they were buried, deliberately covered with fill dirt while still intact. Why would a city bury perfectly functional buildings instead of tearing them down? One theory gaining traction in alternative history circles is that Chicago didn't burn in 1871. At least, not the way the official story claims. The fire narrative explains why so much of old Chicago is missing from the historical record. No buildings to study. No architecture to analyze. Everything burned. The city started fresh. But Frank's photographs show buildings that didn't burn. Buildings that were simply covered up and forgotten. Buildings that suggest Chicago's real history is buried beneath the modern city we see today. The Tartaria theory connects to this. The idea that advanced global civilization existed in the 1700s and 1800s, and that its traces were systematically erased through a combination of natural disasters, deliberate destruction, and historical revisionism. Chicago's buried city fits this pattern. Advanced infrastructure, sophisticated architecture, and an entire street network entombed beneath the official narrative of rebuilding after the fire. Frank found evidence that the gas lines he documented connected to a central distribution system that extended beyond the downtown core. He traced one main line for 3 miles before it disappeared into a sealed section marked "Condemned no entry, CTA order 1947. That's 76 years after the supposed fire. Why would the city seal gas lines in 1947 that were supposedly abandoned in 1871? The Chicago Transit Authority has never provided a clear answer. The sections remain sealed, access denied. Other cable workers who've gone underground since Frank's time report similar experiences, finding structures that don't match the maps, seeing sealed doorways and bricked over passages that suggest a much larger underground network than officially acknowledged. Most don't talk about it. The ones who do get reassigned, just like Frank did, there's an unofficial rule among Chicago's underground workers. Don't photograph anything unusual. Don't measure anything that contradicts your work order. Don't ask about the sealed sections. Install your cable, file your report, and move on. Frank broke that rule. He paid for it with the rest of his career stuck on surface work. But he got something in return. Proof. Evidence that Chicago's underground hides a history the city doesn't want examined too closely. The photographs he saved show a city that doesn't fit the timeline, architecture that's too advanced for the claimed era, infrastructure that's too developed for the official story of rapid post-fire reconstruction, and most importantly, they show that someone at some point decided it was easier to bury that city than to explain it. Frank Kowalski retired in 2014. He tried one last time to get his full archive of photographs released through a Freedom of Information Act request. The request was denied. The photographs were classified as infrastructure security information and deemed not subject to public disclosure. The three-story building he found beneath the Willis Tower, the Kepler and Sons storefront, the gas distribution hub from 1856, all of it remains buried, sealed away, hidden beneath a city that rebuilt itself on top of a history it chose to forget. Frank's story raises a question that Chicago's official historians refuse to address. If the city buried an entire functional downtown instead of demolishing it after the 1871 fire, what else is down there that we're not being told about? The answer is still underground, waiting in sealed tunnels, behind bricked-over doorways, in sections marked condemned that were never actually damaged, just inconvenient to the official story. And every time a new cable gets laid or a new tunnel gets dug, there's a chance someone like Frank will see something they're not supposed to see, document something they're not supposed to document, and start asking questions the city doesn't want answered. The buried streets of Chicago aren't just history, they're evidence of a past that doesn't match the narrative, evidence that someone went to enormous effort to hide. Frank saw that evidence. He photographed it. And for that, he spent the last 16 years of his career on surface installations, knowing that beneath his feet lay a city that officially doesn't exist. What else is buried under the cities we walk through every day? What other histories have been sealed away behind the official story? Chicago might not be unique. It might just be the place where someone finally documented what everyone who works underground already knows. The past isn't always in history books. Sometimes it's 40 feet below the sidewalk, perfectly preserved, waiting for someone to ask the right questions about why it was buried in the first place. If you want to see how other American cities hide similar underground secrets, that video is on screen now. Subscribe for more suppressed history that doesn't make it into the official record. I'll see you in the next one.